I am so excited to be having this discussion today. I am talking with Vanessa Hill, who I have recently spent a beautiful day with at a conference
Mhm.
that she organized. She is the every district has their own way of calling it, whether it is advanced academics or gifted and talented programming, and they call it directors, and they call it, assistant to the vice superintendent, whatever. But Vanessa is in that role in amphitheater schools in Tucson, Arizona. And I just recently had the wonderful opportunity to meet with her, some of her teachers, some of the parents in the district, and even
Mhm.
some children who were involuntarily forced to attend. And I hope didn't regret it, didn't hate it once they were there. And
Yeah.
so I'm so excited to have Vanessa here. And I'm Vanessa, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. And first, I
Mhm.
would love to hear about the role that you're in right now. And
Mhm.
please make sure that you toot your own horn about the big award and recognition that you recently received.
Oh, Lisa, thank you so much. So, yes, I am the Gifted Education Coordinator. So, in our district, that's what we refer to it as for Amphitheater Public Schools. And so, oh, and so my big award, I suppose, I will start there, is Gifted Education Coordinator for NAGC. So, I'm really excited about that. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that.
I mean, that's it's so exciting.
Oh, thank you. Um, and so how I became coordinator is some years back, what we had in our department was what's called a reach co-chair. And so it would be two people and they would share the job of chairperson. And then our district realized that, you know what, we actually need a full-time person to be dedicated to giftedness in our district. And so oftentimes then the co-chair, you would teach part-time and then you would be the chair part-time. And that's kind of hard to juggle those two roles. And so then they created a full-time coordinator position, and this is my fourth year. And of course, leading up to that, I still had to go out and teach because of the teacher shortage in Arizona, but that's been just fine. But I think this year might be the first year I just get to focus on it full time. So that's that aspect of it. And I started out as
Well,
a,
let me ask
go
you,
ahead, Lisa.
I want to ask you about this Reach. So Reach is
Sure.
the name. Is that just your district or is it what all of Arizona calls gifted and talented?
Oh, that's great. So it's just our district. And so, for example, like there's GATE programs and there's GEM programs and there's SUN programs. So every district has their own acronym.
Okay. What does REACH stand for?
Okay,
Is it
so
an
yeah.
acronym or is it just like a word? Like we're reaching. Okay.
Yeah, it is an acronym actually, realizing excellence through academic and creative help.
Okay. We're big fans of acronyms in the education sphere. If you
Yes.
are watching this and you're a parent or a kid, just know that if you ever are dealing with education, we never found an acronym we didn't like. I've seen jokes about teachers having conversations where the entire conversation is just in acronyms.
I love that. I love that.
It's what we do.
Yeah.
So coordinator of the REACH program, and
Yeah.
prior to that, when you were teaching, what's your teaching background?
So my teaching background is when I first started, I was teaching middle school, sixth grade, and I started out as an English language arts social studies teacher, and then my partner and I switched it up, and I took over math and kept social studies, and then a couple years into that. I started teaching the single subject acceleration class called pre-algebra at the time. And I ended up having a lot of gifted students in that class. And those students would also be in my homeroom class. And I absolutely fell in love with that population and started pursuing my gifted endorsement. And then I took a little break to have a couple of kids, and I came back as a gifted specialist or reach teacher at a Title I school in our district. And then the next year I picked up another school. And then the next year I picked up a third school. So at one point I was teaching Reach at 3 Title I schools and coaching 8 future problem solving teams. And I had 2 young children. And so my experience as a gifted specialist in our district has solely been in Title I schools. So it's been a beautiful blend of when I started out, I was in an upper middle class school and then finished up in the Title I population with the Title I population.
People who are unfamiliar, Title One,
Hmm.
when a school gets a Title One designation, it's based on the percentage of students in the school who would be receiving free or reduced lunch assistance. And so
Yeah.
if you have a certain percentage of your students who qualify for free or reduced lunch, whether they choose to elect to receive those benefits or not, but if you have a certain
Right.
population who is eligible to receive those benefits, then you would be designated a Title I school. This frees up some federal money for you. And
Yeah.
this can be very helpful actually, because if you have a gifted population in a Title I school, there's no rules in Title I that say you can't use Title I funds to serve that gifted population. And so I strongly encourage administrators who feel that their campus may be kind of on the cusp to encourage parents. I mean, if parents, sometimes parents have some kind of pride about it, like I don't want my kid getting free lunch, or I don't want it. With I think that there's much less stigma about free lunch than there used to be because everything's electronic now. I think
Yeah.
it when kids used to like pay cash, like bring their $1.50 or whatever, then I think it was more noticeable. But now everybody just has a lunch account, and some
Yep.
people's parents are putting the money in through typically some very, very difficult to access link on the district website to fill up
Exactly.
that. Every district in the country makes it very hard for parents to find where to fill up
Yep.
the lunch account. But I think that stigma has kind of gone away. And so I would
Yeah.
strongly encourage administrators to encourage parents to fill out the application, because
Yep.
if the kids qualify, then there's some money that is freed that is very much, while there are obviously restrictions because it is federal funding, it has guidelines, that money is more free than a lot of the money coming into schools. I think I someday I need to do a whole video on school finance.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the most difficult classes for me to really get my mind around when I was working on my master's in educational administration, was
Yeah.
just how 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 principals' hands are tied in so many different ways based on where different money is coming from and how they're allowed to use those funds, and that it's not one big pot and you just use it however you want. So um,
Exactly.
I appreciate you mentioning that Title I, because I don't think enough people consider that if you have identified gifted students on a Title I campus, that those Title I funds can be used to their benefit as well. It's not just like, oh, well, we can only use it for the general population or the struggling
Exactly.
population. So
Exactly.
those funds are useful. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Of
Now, tell
course.
me about your own experience as growing up as a child, like in education. What was your educational experience like?
Oh, so that's such a great question, Lisa. And I have kind of an interesting story about it. So we moved from a small town in Illinois and up to Wisconsin, an even smaller town in Wisconsin, kind of during my elementary years. And I attended a private school for part of that. And then we moved back to Illinois when I was in 8th grade, a very small town in Illinois. And what happened was when they registered for me for school, and this is so interesting to me, they just made the assumption and that I needed to be in the lowest level classes. So I start school in a class with students that had been identified for special education um, services. And I went home to my mom and I said, Mom, I don't think I'm in the right place because there's a lot of behavior issues and I was dying. I just wanted to learn and I was not learning in that environment. And so then they gave me, I believe, Lisa, it was the Iowa Basic Skills Test or something. And then all of a sudden, I'm in the highest level classes. And so that was kind
A
of
lot
my first,
soon. Yeah.
yeah. And so that was kind of my first introduction to what I suppose they didn't call it gifted in Illinois at that time. And, I'm 53 years old, so that was a long time ago. And so I ended up there, and then that continued through high school. Now, what I did notice with myself is when I was a sophomore, taking Algebra 2, which was just 1 year advanced at the time, actually wasn't like developmentally ready for that. And so I think that that did a little bit of harm as opposed to good, where I think if I had stayed on level with math, I would have better understood it and maybe gone farther. But I only needed to get through Algebra 2, so I didn't take any more math.
I'm
Um,
curious about this
yeah,
because I
yeah,
had a similar experience where
hmm
I was on an accelerated path for math. And
sure.
in my case, I know I was definitely harmed by it, but it was not the fact that I was advanced in math, but it was because the teaching method wasn't adapted to meet that. And so I think
Oh,
that if the teaching method had been a little bit different, then I think it would have been fine. Or if they had realized earlier, this is the group that we're going to advance, and we need to make sure that they're prepared for that advancement,
yeah,
rather than just doing this abrupt shift from
yeah.
regular to all of a sudden this advanced track. And I feel like there was this gap. This is one of the places where I think an underused form of acceleration could be really helpful, which is telescoping, where we take like 3 years and put them into two instead of like trying to skip or trying to rush, but we take a longer thing, not combining 2 years into one, but 3 years into two. I feel like that's underused.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful idea. And I've never heard of that approach before. So I really, really like that. Like
Yeah,
I
you
like
could
that
take
idea.
like, you take like sixth and seventh grade, like let's say you have a middle school model.
Yeah,
And so you have sixth through eighth graders. So let me just mention that for people who are unfamiliar with this terminology. So
yeah,
their schools do the breaks of the grade levels differently. Some schools will have like all the kindergarten through fifth graders together, and then they'll have sixth through eighth together, and then ninth
yeah,
through 12th together. That's a
yeah,
middle school model.
yeah.
Then some schools do a junior high model, which is typically when we say junior high, we mean seventh and eighth grade.
Hmm.
Some school districts have like a K4 campus and then a 5-6 campus and then a 7-8 campus and a 9-10 campus and 11-12 campus. So
Hmm.
schools will do this based on, and some people will be like, why would you do that? And a lot of times they're doing it in order to control school size. It's a very common thing in fast growing districts where they
Hmm.
don't have buildings big enough to
Yeah,
handle the attendance zone for that. So if you're in a middle school model and you have sixth through eighth graders on a campus, you could do sixth, seventh, and eighth grade math in sixth and seventh grade, as long as you have the same group of kids. You have a cohort and they do sixth and seventh grade math together. Typically, ideally the same teacher, so that
yeah,
that teacher knows the arc of it, the scope of it.
yeah.
But it doesn't have to be. And they do sixth through eighth, and then in eighth grade they can easily move into what would be like the ninth grade. The difficulty
Exactly.
can come for some of these schools that they don't have their teacher certifications don't match what they're trying to do with the kids because
Yeah.
you'll have my son encountered this. He was in sixth grade and he needed to take algebra one,
Yeah.
um, but there weren't teachers at the elementary school who were certified to teach algebra one.
Yep.
So he had to go up to the junior high. So
Hmm.
I had to go get him. My school actually gave me a conference period at the time where I needed to go drive him over there. So
Yeah.
what you're describing, I feel like I don't think your experience is unique, but I don't think it's because of the acceleration. I think it's because especially at the time when we were in school, because
Yeah.
I'm 57, so we're kind of in the same
Yep.
ballpark.
Yep.
That their idea of acceleration was simply to shove,
Yeah.
and so I think
A
that's
hundred
where the
percent.
harm came. Yeah, my
Yeah. Well, thank
teacher,
you.
I've told this story before. In eighth grade, we were doing algebra one, and the teacher was trying to keep up with the high school teacher. So if we were on chapter 7 and she found out that the high school was on chapter 9, we just skipped chapter
Oh, jeez.
8. And the next year it was fine because it was geometry the first
Right.
semester. But the
Right.
second semester of geometry, when we started doing proofs, when you
Yeah.
needed algebra, I was just lost. And I still have nightmares about going to math class as a senior, taking calculus and having no clue where I was. Like I just made it through sheer force of will, right? But I did not know what I was doing. And recently, my favorite math program for gifted, for particularly like for homeschool, like people who are trying to homeschool gifted kids, is
Yeah.
Beast Math. And I was I was next to them, like I had a table next to their booth at the Georgia Gifted Conference last year, and no, it was Wisconsin. The
Oh,
Wisconsin Gifted Conference. I was next to them
yeah.
in Georgia too, but it was Wisconsin that they did this. At the end of the conference, I think the guy had like burned out on me fangirling over him, and he gave me the algebra book because I was telling him my story of like how I had had these gaps in algebra, and it made me so sad because now I just love math so much. And so I
Yeah,
actually
me
have the
too.
whole Beast Math algebra that
Nice.
I do just for fun now. Yeah. So sorry, this is like a long tangent, but I don't think your
No.
experience is unusual, but I don't think it was you. I really do
Oh,
think it was
thank you.
structural engineering.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because I've always been like, no, it was just my brain.
Yeah. No, I don't think that was the case.
Mm,
If they'd
thanks.
been able to be a little bit more intentional about the method that they used, right? And I know
Yeah.
that your district now has a strong acceleration program, which I love because I think this is like one of my pet peeves is when people say they have a gifted program, but they don't allow acceleration. I don't
Right.
understand it.
Yeah.
But you guys have one, and I think these are
Hmm.
some of the considerations to have. Is like I
Hmm.
think too many people think of acceleration as just we're going to skip this kid,
Yeah.
and that is one form of acceleration, but there are like 20. So
Right.
yeah.
Right.
And then when you were in your program, whether it was called a gifted program or not, what were some of the things that you feel looking back that you're like, oh, that was a lost opportunity? Like, I wish they would have done X, like, or I would have benefited had I had more opportunity to do whatever.
In my own personal education experience, oh geez. Well, um, I think because at the time, like the only like neither one of my parents graduated college. So they had me when they were, excuse me, like had just turned 18 years old, right? Pregnant in high school. And so, my parents, bless them, were just like, you're going to college, you're going to college. And I I think and I did, obviously, and I went right out of high school. But I didn't understand like the importance and value of getting good grades. Like even in high school, I got a D in geometry, Lisa, because I could not do proofs to save my life,
Oh
and
yeah.
I did not have a strong teacher. He's a really poor teacher, and I just ended up getting a D. And then I think that leads to like imposter syndrome and like I'm dumber than I thought I was, all those things. And then so then even going to college was incredibly difficult for me, first time on my own, first kid going to college. And, I didn't go to class for my first semester. I completely tanked. And so that's a huge regret. And then it was so hard to bring that GPA back up. And then, and so I struggled my entire college career to get that up. And then, you know, and anyway, and then going back to get my master's, that was what was a much better experience because I was 29 years old and my frontal cortex was fully developed and I could make better decisions. But so I think I just wish I would have known, like if you just put forth a little bit of effort, a little more effort, or or your maybe your parents cared a little more about your grades. I don't know, but I do wish that I would have like had that stronger work ethic and that because I look back now and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have graduated with a higher GPA in both high school and college. But I can tell you my and I'm sure as yours was too, Lisa, it was a very traditional educational experience. And the one I will say this, the one thing I remember in my eighth grade social studies class was um, our teacher let us interview somebody about an experience, and I got to interview my grandfather, who was a 19-year-old World War II prisoner of war. He was a pilot, crashed, captured, and he was German descent. And so and he had never talked to anybody about that experience except for me, because, those guys at that time, they
Yeah.
didn't talk about it. He woke up with night terrors all the time, right? And he was on a death march when the war ended. Like, so, I
Was
mean,
he in the
anyway, so
Pacific or was he in Germany? Was
He was in Germany.
Wow, that's incredible. So this is
Yeah.
another thing that we have in common that
Awesome.
is going to surprise you.
Okay.
My uh, grandfather, my maternal grandfather,
Yeah.
was a pilot, a
Oh,
Marine aviator in World War
okay.
II, and was shot
Okay.
down twice.
Whoa.
So he was in the Pacific. He was
Okay. Okay, sure.
held as prisoner of war that I am aware of. But that's just an incredible coincidence that we
Yeah.
both have that. Yeah. But
Yeah.
what an interesting experience for him. This huge, like, that must have been the most incredible, like, weird dynamic to be like of German descent and being held a prisoner in the country where your like grandparents came from. I just
Exactly.
recently I was working with teachers in St. Paul, Minnesota, at this incredible school for the gifted there,
Mm.
um, and the woman who was in charge of the event was driving me around, and we ended up, my flight got delayed. And she said, well, is there anything around St. Paul that you'd like to see? And I said, well, actually, my great grandfather is from Hastings, Minnesota, which is really close to here. Is there any way we could go out there? And
Oh,
we went
neat.
out to the cemetery, and I went to the grave of my great great grandparents and all of my like great great, and like half the cemetery had my mother's like birth name, right?
Wow.
And all the graves were in German. Everything was in
Oh,
German. They were like
that's
still
so
speaking German,
cool.
Yeah, it was like
Yeah,
all German. And I thought to myself, like, I'm not that far removed from it. My French
that's
Canadian
right.
ancestors, my great great grandmother on the census record, like her parents didn't speak English. They only spoke
Oh,
French.
oh.
And which is crazy because my French is terrible. But I think that we forget how close we are. You mentioned that neither of your parents had gone to college. It actually wasn't until after World War II that many people graduated from high school. Like high school
Right.
graduation
Right.
was not a thing that long ago. And somehow we had this shift to where we went from high school's optional to college is mandatory in like a
Right.
generation.
Right.
I
Yes.
don't think it's healthy.
I don't either.
I've actively spoken against this. Like, I don't think it's
Yeah.
healthy to like line up college banners outside kindergarten classes. I
Oh,
just,
we do it
you
in
know,
our district, Lisa, just so you know.
okay, sorry.
No,
I'm not
don't
trying
be
to offend
sorry. Don't be sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
not trying to offend anyone, but there's
No.
two reasons why I don't like
Yeah.
it. Number
Yeah.
one, I think Ian Bird, who's a colleague of mine, very well
Yeah.
known in this field, we co-wrote a book together and we're personal friends. So I'll just like in the interest of full
Yeah.
disclosure.
Yeah.
But Ian's talked a lot about the false narrative that you get good grades and then that will get you into a good college and then you will get a good degree and then you will get a good job and then you will be happy.
Right.
Like all like good grades plus good college plus good job equals happiness. And that equation is not balanced. That is
Yep.
not a balanced equation. It's not true. And it's interesting. Our piano tuner is in Mensa. Like you don't
Oh,
you
right.
don't just because you're highly intelligent doesn't mean that you owe the world to become a rocket scientist, right? Like you
Right.
don't have to become an astrophysicist because you're gifted. And I don't think that college is the path that every gifted kid needs to be on, and especially not elite college, because a
Right.
lot of these very large elite schools, like I live in Texas, so the University of Texas or Texas A&M, where
Sure.
these kids are going in as freshmen in these enormous 600 student
Right.
like forum classes where the
Right.
teacher doesn't know you from Adam, and lots of times your
Right.
classes are being taught by graduate students instead of
Sure.
professors because they're off busy researching. Those I strongly encourage many gifted kids go to a junior college first or go to a smaller school where you will have better conversations with
Yeah.
the people in the field. Like, one of my sons uh, did an undergraduate interview at the University of Chicago, and he went there for the day and like attended classes. And he
Mm.
came home and he was like, there were like 12 kids in the class, and we were just sitting
Oh,
around at a table
wow.
with the professor. And he was like, that's what I want. He ended up not
Oh.
getting in, so he didn't go there. Um, but but I know that there's a place for elite education. I'm not a hypocrite.
Sure.
Many people know my youngest son is in law school at Harvard, so I'm not trying to lie here. But I will say that that's the right place for a very small group of people.
Right.
And that is a really good place for hardworking teacher pleasers. And that isn't always a match for our gifted population. You know,
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
you have to look at what schools are welcoming them. I think that one of the things I'm taking away from your story, there's so much there, is that there's so much there. And we're really like only still in the introduction. But I think that there's so much there because um, one of the messages, I think, is that a lot of what leads to success in school is even having the narrative of what success is and what it takes. And a lot of our parents,
Yep.
it's not that they don't care about education. I think a lot of times teachers see kids who don't have a strong family background of education, and they assume that that means the parents don't care about education and don't value education. But in your case, the opposite was true. Your parents not having the opportunity to go to college meant that they had an almost overwhelming push for you to go to college. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, because they had not been themselves, they didn't know to tell you in high school, like, look, as soon as these grades hit your high school transcript, they're going to make a difference in whether you get to go to college or not, or what college you get to go to. They didn't. It wasn't that they didn't care about you getting into college or going to college. It was that their own inexperience in that domain meant they didn't know what to tell you. They would have told you had they known, but they did not know. And
Yep.
so that to me, that's where I used to be the AVID coordinator. Um, on our high school campus, an AVID demonstration school. And I think that while I have mixed feelings about AVID right now, I would say that one of the things that it was at the time trying to do is to level that playing field,
Yes.
is to help kids understand those soft skills
Yep.
that they might not know. Now, I don't agree with people who say that gifted kids get to college and they fall apart because they don't know how to study. To me, I feel like that idea held more weight when we were growing up and there wasn't the internet. Now, if you're
There
so
you go.
smart that you didn't have to study in high school, when you get to college and you realize you don't know how to study, you just Google or you just
That's right.
ask AI. I'm in
Yep.
this class. This is my textbook. Design a
Yep.
study plan for me, right? Like
Yep.
there, if you're that smart. But I
Yeah.
think that when we were growing up, when you got to college, it was oftentimes an absolute huge shift from like daily homework to 4 assignments a semester,
Yeah.
where every single test counted so much.
Yeah.
This is another thing I don't like when schools let kids with good grades and good attendance exempt themselves out of final exams. I think that's a huge mistake.
Yeah.
My school district I live in and taught in does this.
Mm.
It's a big mistake because those are the kids who are going to go to college. And those
Right.
are the kids who are going to find that their final may be the only grade they have for the whole year. And if they're not used to
Right.
taking these high stakes tests, then where are they? Right. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like reward them in some other way if you want to. I feel
Yeah.
like I feel like rewarding kids for grades is so redundant because
Yeah.
the grade itself is a reward.
Yeah.
What, so now you're like rewarding a reward. So
Yeah.
and I've talked about this before about here I am supposed to be interunion. I'm just talking
No,
about
of
the
course.
I talked before about how when parents pay teachers for grades, that drives me insane. Like when parents pay their kids for good grades, that drives me
Yeah.
insane because you don't have to be gifted to realize that math doesn't work out. Like think about how much time it takes to get an A in AP Calculus BC. What
Oof.
like how many
Yes.
hours of work does that
Oof.
take, right?
So
Okay,
many.
now your parents gonna give you $20 because you got an A. You don't have to be gifted to realize it's like 2 cents an hour, right?
Yeah.
And I
What a
feel
ripoff.
what a ripoff, right? And I feel like it's actually demoralizing.
Yeah.
There, there's been a lot written about this. If people are interested in this, I feel like they should read 2 books.
Yeah.
One is um, Alfie Kohn's book, Punished by Rewards. This is
Mm.
a must read for parents and teachers. The subtitle of the book is The Trouble with A's, Praise, Grades, and Other Bribes. Um,
Mm.
and
Mm.
then another book is Dan Pink's book on called Drive, on the surprising truth about what motivates us. And
Nice.
I talk a lot about motivation, but I think that this idea is demotivating
Yeah.
when we tell kids we're going to bribe you for that.
Yep.
So what about your experience as a parent?
Mm. Okay, so I have a son and a daughter, and I have my son is, I would say, and he hasn't been tested in a while, but my best guess is he's visually, spatially, profoundly gifted. Like it's really, anyway, he's crazy visual spatial reasoner, and ADHD. And then my daughter is also nonverbally gifted, and anxiety diagnosis. So my son, through middle school, like he was actually chosen as like one of the Rotary honorees, and like got straight A's, and then like maybe 1B, something like that. And it was so easy, right? He put zero effort in. And but at the time we were like, he's gifted in math as well. And so we're like, okay, son, we can't wait for you to be an engineer. And he was like, I'm going to go to Stanford. I'm going to play soccer. I'm going to be an engineer. Then freshman year of high school happened last year. And he came home almost every day. I hate school. I'm dropping out. I don't care. Like, this is stupid. And so that has been a huge emotional lift for my husband and I. And so now I've had to let go of that dream that I had for my son and mourn that dream. And it's okay. And but now he wants to, next year as a junior, do JTED, get some welding certificates, be a welder, and own his own business. And so now I'm just supporting that, right? Like, so we're going to go check out JTED. We're going to do a tour, and then I'm going to make sure you get you get enrolled by January, and all the things that you need to do to make that happen for yourself. And right now the struggle is, my husband and I are like, we'd really, because you have the ability to get A's and B's, we'd really like that to happen, but we have to be okay with C's. So like he's taking Intro to Calc AB, and he's getting an A-, right? But in his on-level environmental science class, it's a struggle to maintain a C, because it's packets, it's fill in the blank, and he is like, anyway, he hates that stuff. And so many of his classes are these packets, fill in the blank, and he can ace the test, right, without doing any of that. So in his mind, it's constantly why. Then my daughter is just your classic compliant, people-pleasing girl, and just like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the A, and I'm going to, be a great student. I'm going to internalize some anxiety about my, so all those things. So they're two very different kids, and I have to say, it's like an emotional roller coaster, Lisa.
How old's your daughter? You said
So my
your son
daughter,
is great.
my son is 16, a sophomore. I redshirted him because he just was not ready. At July 25th birthday, just not ready for kinder when he just turned 5. My daughter, however,
Probably
she's,
do. Let me say something about this,
yeah,
because I've
sure,
spoken
please.
extensively about not liking holding gifted kids back. But
Okay.
probably his ADHD diagnosis, or at least ADHD manifestation at a time, is partly what made him at a late birthday not ready for kinder. Not necessarily not ready for the cognitive work of kinder,
Oh,
but not ready to
100.
sit in a desk all day.
Amen, sister. That's
If
exactly it.
they'd had
And
like if he'd had like a outdoor kindergarten,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
And even at the time, I was like contemplating, okay, maybe he needs to do Montessori, but then like knowing that Montessori is like, so he also struggles with, like, he's that gifted kid, that loud noise, bright lights. So I was just, anyway,
Intensity. Yep.
yeah, all those, yeah. So then my daughter, though, she started kinder at 4, with an August 15th birthday, and she's 14 years old now. So it was just complete night and day. She was ready behaviorally, all the things.
So what grade is she in now?
She's a freshman.
Okay. So they're a couple years apart, but they're only 1 year apart in school.
Yep,
Okay.
school.
Yeah.
And
Good.
they attend different high schools.
Okay. Because
Yep.
of the programs they want to be in, or
Actually, no. Oddly enough, like we I I think sometimes being a teacher is a blessing and a curse, right? So I was like trying to like find the perfect fit for my kids. And so I ended up like, putting them in a chart. Anyway, all this
yeah.
ridiculousness. And so then my son ended up at one middle school, and my daughter ended up at another, and their feeder pattern high school is different. And so all they cared about was being with their friends, right? And so
Yeah. I want
there
to
you
say something
go.
about that.
Please.
I think you really hit on something, and then you gave it a glance. Oh, and I think it's worth coming back to, which
Sure.
is basically the curse of knowledge that when
Right.
you're a teacher, and especially, and you and I have shared experience that, which I'm starting to worry that we're like the same person, but um, I, we have a shared experience that we taught or were administrators in the district in which our children attend. And that has been
Yeah.
my experience my children's entire school career.
Wow.
So except that before that, we lived in Germany for a few years and I homeschooled them
Yeah.
when we lived in Germany. Germany does not allow homeschooling, but we lived there covered under the status of forces agreement. And if you're covered under the status of forces agreement, you're like a US citizen working for the Department of Defense, covered under status of forces, you can homeschool. And so
Neat.
I homeschooled when we lived in Germany. But other than that, I have been the teacher, I've actually been the teacher of record of all of my children in at least
Wow.
one grade. And
Wow.
so the curse of knowledge is that like they attended the high school at which I was a teacher.
Yeah.
You bet your lifesavers. I was in that counseling office saying, uh, that kid is getting Mr. Young for world history.
Right.
Like no other teacher but Mr. Young, right?
Yep.
And I want, I want Farrah Horton for I probably shouldn't be using their real names, but I am. I want Farrah Horton for pre-AP geography, and I want like, and this English teacher, right? And
Yep.
some of the problem that came in that, um, the advanced placement classes weren't always given to the best teachers. In the case of AP World History, yes, it was. In the case of AP Calculus, yes, it was. But in the case of English, it was not. And that was difficult because that was my content area. I taught language
Yeah.
arts and social studies. And it was very hard for me to see my child come home with work from their pre-AP English class that was not the quality and caliber of thinking that I
Yeah.
was asking my ninth grade on level English students to do. And
Yeah.
this is very difficult. So I feel your pain. So
Thank
many
you.
of my teacher friends have played all these games where like they put their kids in a charter school. They are
Yep.
like trying to homeschool kids while they're teaching full time. They're like they've got like
Yeah.
their kids on Zoom with them on a phone while they're teaching.
Yeah.
They've got like
Right.
they're moving where they themselves teach in order to bring their kids with them. Like they're doing
Yep.
all these things because they know what's optimal. And I feel like in some ways ignorance is bliss. Like if you can
Right.
send your kid to school and not know everything that you know, it's like eating in the factory where the sausage is being made. Like
That's right, Lisa.
it's very hard. And I think that one of the messages I would love for teachers to take away from this is you're not like, do not let that curse of knowledge harm your children because
Yep.
there is an opportunity cost in moving them all around. And there's an opportunity cost in their feeling your worry. Um,
Yep.
I
Yep.
would also say that um, many, I think it's very important. I'm looking over, like, I'm not going to go pull it off my shelf, but over there I have the book where Ed Amond, who I'm a huge fan of Ed,
Yes. Yes.
I have he doesn't know. I don't think he'll watch this, um, but he in one of what I think one of his most important things he did was in the work he did with other authors on misdiagnosis of gifted children. So,
Yeah.
um, and this has been such a thing because I don't think you need an anxiety diagnosis or you need an ADHD diagnosis to see these behaviors. Like I've yet to meet a profoundly gifted child who does not meet the diagnostic criteria for some form of ADHD. Like there's
Right.
currently three kinds.
Yep.
Um, and really many, as I mentioned on Saturday when I was there, that
Yeah.
many pediatric neuropsychologists believe that executive function disorder is actually a different type of ADHD. It just starts to get very confusing because right now we have ADHD inattentive type, ADHD hyperactive type, and then that fabulous combo flavor.
Yep.
And and so if you add executive function into the mix, then think of all the different types you could get.
Oh.
ADHD, executive function and inattention, executive function, inattention, and hyperactivity, or
Yeah.
it, hyperactivity and executive function, but not inattention. Like then it just starts getting so muddy. And
Exactly.
So I think that one of the pieces of advice that I give to parents is the same reasoning that I feel like about gifted identification is that you identify to serve. So
Yeah.
there's no benefit in identification or diagnosis if there's no service offered.
Yeah.
So if you need or service that you are going to avail yourself of. So if the purpose of identifying a child or diagnosing a child is so that they can receive the services that they need and so that they can learn about themselves and so that they can give themselves some grace and mercy.
Hmm.
This is not necessarily the specialty of gifted children. Gifted kids and adults are not necessarily great at giving themselves grace and mercy.
Yeah.
But the ADHD we see in, I mean, I think there's a really good book on this called Back to Normal by Dr. Nalati. I don't know if you've ever read this book,
Mm-mm.
but
Mm-mm.
it is so fantastic. It's basically, I mean, here, I'm going to grab it.
Sure.
Um, people think people think I have all these books here, like to make it look cool for a video,
Right.
but actually I'm literally using them you can tell that I really read this book. So
Yeah.
this book is called Back to Normal by Enrico Nalati. And he is a clinical psychologist from California. And he basically argues that the reason that our boys keep getting diagnosed with ADHD is that we have made girl behavior the standard of behavior in school.
Sure.
And he talks about like all of the stuff. You can see all of this. I highly recommend this book. I feel like it's a book every parent of a gifted kid needs to read. And I feel like it's every teacher who works with gifted kids needs to read. The sub if you couldn't see it clearly on the video or you're just listening to this, the subtitle is Why Ordinary Childhood Behavior is Mistaken for ADHD, Bipolar Disorder, and Autism Spectrum Disorder. And he talks a lot about how these diagnoses were created and basically like with bipolar disorder, he basically talks about how a single person made it so that we're diagnosing kids with bipolar disorder, what we never did before. And
Yeah.
so some of these advances are good. It used to be in earlier editions of the DSM that children could not be diagnosed with depression, and yet we know for sure that children can get depression. But I think that we've also swung almost too far where we've pathologized
Hmm.
kind of normal behavior, especially for gifted children.
Yeah.
They're what Dr. Jim Webb called their existential depression and their anxiety. Like it's almost impossible not to be nervous and anxious a little bit when you're gifted because you you look at something and you instantly see, oh, I can see how this could go horribly wrong. And
Right.
you're not in control because you're a kid.
Right.
And so you're
Right.
walking in and you're going, this is not good at all, right?
Right.
And but they have no power.
Exactly.
So how are you not going to be nervous in that situation? You know it's
Yeah.
being done wrong and you can't fix it.
Yeah. Excellent point. Excellent point.
It's a recipe for
Yeah,
disaster.
it
So if
is.
you tell me about what it's been like being named the coordinator of the year. Like this, like what an amazing thing. But what how has that awoken your own perfectionism and imposter syndrome dragon?
Well, luckily, no. Um, I am. It's been really nice to be recognized, but at the same time, I feel like it's made zero difference in like
Yeah.
like in how like I go about my day to day. I think um, and I'm sure Lisa, you'll feel this way. Like um, I get so I don't know how else to like passionate and like inflamed, like one thing I'm actually saying these days and is like I need to not care so much. I feel like for my own mental health, my own emotional health, like because I just so desperately want people to do what's best, not just for gifted kids, right? But just for all kids. And when you're in this public, I don't probably just education domain, there's a lot that like is not in your control and is infuriating, and so I actually think like if anything it's causing me to kind of step back and be like maybe don't yeah, I don't know how to, but maybe don't care so much, try to just focus on like who has drank the gifted Kool-Aid and is on board with you and doing amazing things in their classroom.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel your pain with this. I feel like I have yet to find the hill I will not die on, right?
Right,
I
right.
yeah, it's a thing. I
Yeah,
think it's a gifted thing. I think it's a gifted thing. And this is part of the misdiagnosis, right? This inability to let it go. And that inability, I think it's part of the intensities or overexcitabilities, right? That
yeah,
you mentioned that one of your children has a lot of, and
yeah,
I feel like that's part of it. Like once you notice it, you can't unnotice it.
exactly.
And then and people say, just don't whatever. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
you clearly do not understand the assignment, right? So
yeah.
like gifted kid, I joke about how gifted kids feel like there's a vacancy in the supreme ruler of the universe position, and they themselves are solely qualified and uniquely qualified to fill this role, but it's a burden, right? So
Yeah,
if somebody is serving as a coordinator or is someday wanting to step into that role or
yeah,
finds themselves thrust into that role,
yeah.
what are some tips that you would give them based on what's led you to this level of achievement in the profession? What are some things that you would suggest? Like if you want to run a really good gifted program, here's some things to keep in mind.
Well, I think don't be afraid to ask for what you need because you might be pleasantly surprised and hear yes. And I think one of the most important things, what I see a lot of in Southern Arizona is um, students receive gifted services through elementary, and whether that's pull out, cluster, model, a combination of the two. And then once they hit middle school, then it's all up to maybe, let's say, for example, they offer an advanced science, or maybe you're single subject accelerated through math. And then, but there's no specific gifted programming at the middle school level. And then high school, they're completely relying on honors and AP programs to meet the needs of their gifted learners. And that's just not, that does not meet the needs of all your gifted learners. As a
No,
matter of fact,
and it's gutted
yeah,
it fails to acknowledge the social emotional needs of the gifted. Right.
exactly,
They
100%.
lost their peer group that they had in their pull out of their cluster.
Well, and golly, and how, and that's everything to them.
Yes.
Like that's what I realized as a gifted specialist at the elementary level is like, I come to school on the day you're pulling me out for reach, right? Like I might miss any other day, but I'm not going to miss this day because I love it and it means so much to me. So in our district, we wanted to make sure that there's, and while it's not perfect, okay, but there's a class that there's a class where it's going to be all your gifted peers in this class with you at least one period a day, thank goodness. And we're going to focus on your social emotional needs. And then at the high school level, we created a Reach Honors English class because a couple of things were happening. Kids got to high school and were like, hey, am I still gifted? Because
Yeah.
nothing was happening.
Did they
Okay.
peel that purple dot off my folder? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And then the other thing that was happening is we had, our nonverbally gifted kids who might have that average to low verbal score taking an on-level English class and wanting to, pull their eyes out of their head because they're so bored, right? So they deserve access to the more rigorous content. And so that's why we created a Reach Honors English that is going to meet the needs of all kids and provide access to higher level content, but also then incorporate your social emotional needs. And so now and with Reach in the name of the class, like, okay, yes, I know Reach, I'm still gifted. And then we have an advocate on campus. So all gifted kids, whether they take Reach Honors English or not, the advocate reaches out, hey, I'm your gifted advocate. I'm here for you, whatever you need. And then we also have honor seminar and capstone, but anyone can take that, but we encourage our gifted kids to do it. And so I feel really blessed. And it was just all about like, hey, we see this need at this level. You just create a class, right? It's,
Yeah, it's
but
hard. Especially people who've never had to do master schedule at a secondary
yeah,
school have missed out on a special aspect of hell.
right.
Like, if you're really bad in this life, you'll be responsible for the master schedule in hell.
That's right.
So it's a horrible thing. But
Yeah,
and it can be very difficult. Like, neither of us are minimizing the difficulty of making this happen, but that's why it's award winning.
exactly.
But I think
Yeah.
it's worth it, right? And I think
Yes.
if you're going to do that in any class, and I'm not just saying this as a language arts teacher, but
Yep.
English is the class to do it because when you're
Yay. I'm so happy you
discussing,
think that.
yes, because when you're discussing, the only other one would be social studies,
Sure.
not
Sure.
not in like the sense of like physical geography, but human geography or history,
Yes.
or maybe
Yes.
AP psychology,
Sure.
because um, those are the classes where you're going to get to consider the deep ideas of the human psyche and the human experience.
Yes.
And
A
so,
hundred.
in a way, yeah. And so
Yeah.
that's where you're going to get that thinking. So, your visual spatial thinkers, yeah, they may not love writing,
Yep.
but that's not, but they can do the thinking.
Yep.
And they can be in their peers where nobody's going to mock them for deep thinking.
Exactly.
If you're a
Exactly.
good thinker and you're in an on-level high school English class at a regular high school in America, you cannot share your deep ideas because
No.
you will be mercilessly bullied. Like, and it's not that your teacher should have noticed. It's just impossible not. It's impossible to police it. So, um, that kind of subtle, you don't belong, your ideas are not welcome here. So,
Yes.
yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think it is difficult to do. It's difficult to work with the schedules, especially because there's so many competing interests at the
Yes.
secondary level. And I feel this is something I'm not going to ask you to agree or disagree because it might be
Yeah.
uncomfortable. But it's one of the things where I feel like I'm a big believer in the arts and I'm a big believer in extracurricular activities and the things that make a person well-rounded that kids can avail themselves of. I think it's a great leveler because people who can't afford like different things their kids can still through free public education access.
Yep.
But I will say this, in my experience as a teacher and administrator, when you get to the high school level in particular, some of these programs think they drive the bus. And we'll have like sports or even in the arts, like an orchestra program or band program, where they put such a burden of time, devotion, energy, and scheduling on kids that it makes it difficult to serve the whole child. And I object to this. Like I really object to it. We have this problem in Texas where the fall, right now we're in it at the time of this recording. This is the very end of September. And um, we're in marching band season. And
So are
it's a
we.
disaster. It is a
Yep.
disaster. And I have
Yep.
like personal animosity about it
Yeah.
because as a teacher, I would see the kids come in exhausted.
So, I
Just,
mean, they're at school till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, Lisa, 4 to 5 nights a week. What
yes,
are we
yes.
doing?
And when are they supposed to do
Study
what?
and do, and these are the same kids taking really hard classes, right?
Absolutely. And
Yep.
then on the weekends, like on a Friday night, so
Yep.
we our high schools start early. It's ridiculous, but our high school, the bell rings at 7:14 a.m. Well, on the weekday, so they're having to get up super early. And then on the weekend, like let's say a Friday night, they may have an away game and
Yep.
they're getting home on that bus at 1 in the morning.
Yep.
Well, there's no way that they're going to get up at their normal time. And so then their whole sleep schedule is disrupted. And so
Yep.
they sleep late. They can't go to sleep on Saturday night. So they sleep instead. Like their parents are trying to drag them to church or, synagogue
Sure.
or
Sure.
mosque or whatever. And
Yeah.
like the whole family suffers. And the amount of money that it takes. And
Yep.
I think, I think this is kind of when I talk about perfectionism and I say, like Voltaire's quote, the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yep.
I think that sometimes things that are good can be made so big that they take up space beyond their goodness.
Yep.
And
I
this
agree.
is, um, there's a word for this called the any benefit fallacy, where just because something has some benefit, then it's worth taking, like swallowing everything bad that comes with it. Like
Right.
apply the any benefit fallacy to Facebook, right? But I think that this is one of the things I feel strongly about. And so I'm thinking about this schedule and how beautiful it would be if the schedule allowed those gifted kids to have the four core classes together. But you can't do that
No.
because
No.
there are too many
Yep.
competing things. I think
Absolutely.
one thing that I would love to say, oh, I'm going to ask you this question. If
Okay.
you could see one thing that would be a national law that school districts had to abide by with regard to gifted, what would it be? I don't, I want something separate from like everybody should have to be identified. I want something like this, like give me something specific you would love to see. Think all you
Okay.
want. If you think for 10 minutes, I can edit the video.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the opportunity to participate in some kind of enrichment and based on what you just, but like interest-based enrichment, um, and obviously, I mean, obviously, if it could be inside, if it could be during school, right? So we set aside this time, we provide you with the materials you need, the experts you need, all the things you need to provide this enrichment experience based on your strength and your area of interest, just in an effort to make the educational setting more relevant to our gifted kids. To me, that would be like the one thing, like just because let's just provide the time and the space and the experts and all the things so that kids actually can take a deep dive into what they're really interested in learning about.
I love that. I absolutely love that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I
Thank
love that. I
you.
think you're right. Like the problem is relevancy, right? Like a
Yeah,
lot of gifted kids go to school and they're like, yeah, I could learn this in a YouTube video. I do not need to be here.
right,
Like as
right.
soon as you give me a packet, especially like I'm thinking, like I know we're not picking on any one teacher, but
Of
the idea of
course.
environmental science, like I think about the power that my son's AP environmental science class had for him. Like
Yeah.
we can't swim with dolphins because in 2009 he took AP environmental science and it changed his life, right? So
Oh,
what's hard for me is when I see content areas where there's so much power available, and I think that's every
right,
content area really. There's so much
right.
power available, and yet teachers are just leaving that power on the floor. Like they're not
Totally.
leveraging it. And they're not doing it because they don't, some of them because they don't know better. Some of them have never like read the quote, like when you know better do better or whatever. They know better
Right.
and they have no interest in doing better. I have seen
Yes.
that.
Yes.
I still resent, I just mentioned it to somebody, a colleague of mine who I taught with for a long time, that I still, every now and then, Facebook recommends this one other teacher I used to teach with as a possible like friend on Facebook. And I hate this guy. Like
Yeah.
he showed videos every day, all day.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
another social studies teacher. All he ever did was show videos. Kids would sit in
Yep.
his class and he would play a video all
Yep.
day. And it
Yep.
made me so angry. And I was equally angry at the administration that let him do it. Like he was
Exactly.
enabled.
Yep.
But it makes me so furious that his lack of professional integrity
Yep.
has meant that I have no respect for him personally, like as an individual. I have no
Right.
interest in him, right? So
Right.
my dream for gifted kids would be that if you have an identified gifted kid, they are not allowed to darken the doorstep of a teacher who's not trained to teach them and has not committed to teach them. I want teachers held
Oh, I love
accountable
that.
for meeting the, because we have like, so I have a gifted certification, right? So
Yep.
we used to have an endorsement in our state. Now it's a certification. We also have a 30-hour requirement. So theoretically, our state requires that you have 30 hours of GT training if you are teaching gifted kids. But that is not always enforced, right? And the enforcement arm and the audit arm of the state is weak. And so I want to see that enforced. I want to see these teachers they don't have to get the full certification, but they need that training and they need to prove that they know something. I don't want you to be able to have a gifted kid in your class and ruin their life because you sat in a room where professional development occurred, but all you
Yep.
did was breathe and search on your phone. Like
Yep. Yep.
I I hate that. So I want them to have to prove that they know it, and
Yep.
I want them to have to commit to do it, and I want there to be some kind of incentive or disincentive for not doing it. Like I really resent the fact that on the campus where I taught AP, like pre-AP and AP for language arts, I won't speak to any other content. but AP for language arts was very much nepotistic. It was the English department chair gave herself the freshman pre-AP. She gave one of her good friends the sophomores, another of her good friends the juniors, and the other good
Yeah.
friend the seniors.
Yep.
And they had no interest in giftedness. They only had interest in not dealing with behavior.
Yep. Yep.
And I I felt so I would seethe,
Yeah.
just absolutely seethe. I think that teaching advanced classes should be completely meritocracy. It should be completely based on who's committed to actually meeting the needs of these kids in this class,
Yep.
not the people who've just been there the longest or who are best friends with the thing.
With the
Not one of those teachers had a gifted certification, not one.
so depressing.
So depressing. Yeah, that would be my dream. That I
Yeah.
feel like your dream is like all lovely, and my dream is very like. I think that that captures our personalities quite well, actually. This is kinder, gentler, gifted advocate. So this has gone like I'm so grateful to your time, but I know you actually have a job here to do. I was wondering is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to share? Or do you have a message for gifted kids, teachers, or parents that you would love to get out to a broader audience?
Hmm. Well, I think it would be, please don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. I think that's like the greatest gift that we could give our gifted kids, pun intended, is it is okay to say to your teacher, you know what, this is too easy and I need something different. And if you can't figure that out, teacher, then let's talk to my parents. Let's figure who can we tap on their shoulder and ask to help with this. I think that's the message, because if we don't speak up, if we just sit and we're compliant, nothing is going to change. But the more kids, and I advocate for parents speaking up, please don't be afraid to say, my kid is not getting what they need. What are you going to do about it? Because those are my tax dollars paying for my kids' education.
Yeah, I love that. I think that one of the things that I would love to see, and actually, okay, nobody knows this. This is a big reveal right now.
Ooh,
That,
Lisa.
as you know, I have like courses that teachers can take. But
Yeah.
next year, I'm creating a 6-hour parenting gifted kids course.
I'm so
And
grateful to hear that.
yes. And it's going to be available, like individual parents can take it, obviously, but it's also going to be available for districts to purchase a district license to be able to give to all access to all the parents in their district of kids, whatever parent they want to have access to it.
Brilliant.
And one of the modules in the course is effective advocacy. And part of
Perfect.
it will be how to advocate effectively as a parent. And the other
Yeah.
part will be how it's going to be, in a parenting course, but it's to teach kids how to self advocate.
I love
Because
that,
I think
Lisa.
one of the things that happens is that teachers hear certain words and they just shut down. They
Yep.
hear the word
Yep.
boredom and
Yep.
the conversation is over, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so there are ways to do it, right? And so I love hearing what you have to say because I agree with you. And it also confirms to me that this is a needed discussion to have.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for doing that, Lisa. I can't wait. And we will
Yeah,
be
I'm really
purchasing
excited
that.
about it. I try to make one course a year. This year I just
Yeah.
made the social emotional needs of the gifted course, and next year it will be the parent course. So I'm
Yay.
really I'm really looking forward to it because I think it's needed. Thank you so much for your time and your kind attention. Do you um the and I do I just want to take this moment like I felt like I don't want to just wrap up like normal. I want to say
Yeah.
this. I just want to say on behalf of the gifted kids and parents being served by you, thank you.
Oh,
Thank you for being a powerful advocate for gifted. I think it's impossible to know exactly the impact that you will have. My favorite quote from any book ever. Normally I don't have a book in front of me, but I have a copy of it right here.
yay.
This is my favorite book of all time, Middlemarch by George Eliot.
Oh.
This is a pretty copy of it. It's a very long book. Nobody likes to read it. Um, but one of the closing um, one of the closing paragraphs in this book is one of my very favorite things, and I describe it in um, a section I have on teaching gifted kids. And and I think it describes you perfectly. But this
Mm.
is in George Eliot's book. What she's discussing in Middlemarch is a woman who just has a strong desire to make the world better, and
Mm.
she recognizes that she can be a force to make the world better, and she tries really hard in a time and place where she didn't have a lot of power.
Yeah.
And in it, in Middlemarch, it says, and I think this just perfectly describes you. It says the effect of her being was incalculably diffusive, for the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that
Mm.
things are not so ill with you and I as they might have been, is half owing to those who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. And I think
Mm.
that really describes you. That, most of the people who are going to see this don't live where you live. They don't know what you do. They may not have ever heard your name, but you're just going about your day doing good. And
Oh.
that is sending out goodness into the gifted world. And we don't have like, when I was at Mensa, my title was um, Youth and Education Ambassador. And we got that title because somebody called me one day. Like I used to have a different title. Used to be Gifted Youth Specialist. And then I was at an event and someone was introducing me, and they introduced me as the ambassador of the gifted.
Mm.
And I was like, I'm getting a title change, right? But I feel
Right.
that you are that, and an ambassador not just for the needs of the children, but also the needs of their parents, and through that, the needs of the teachers for the support that they need to meet these needs, the needs of the campuses to be able to set up this kind of scheduling, all these many varied voices. And I love how you've captured all of that. Thank you so much for the gift of your time.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it so much. And thank you for all the work that you're doing in the gifted world. I
Oh,
appreciate you so much.
thank you. Um I think I somebody asked me recently, will you ever retire? And I'm like, I don't know that I can.
I
Like
know, right?
I said, I don't know that I can turn it off. I don't
Right?
I don't
Right?
have an off switch. I think I'll be talking about gifted. They'll be lowering me into my grave and I'll be going, but remember,
Right? Right?
the
Don't forget this.
next day. So
Oh,
thank you again so much.
thank you, Lisa. Have a beautiful day.
You too.